Chapter 19.
Newt's mind had begun to dwell on the north for long stretches, particularly at night when he had had nothing to do but ride slowly around and around the herd, listening to the small noises the bedded cattle made, or the sad singing of the Irishmen. He thought of the north, trying to imagine what it must be like. He had grown up with the sun shining, with mesquite and chaparral, armadillos and coyotes, Mexicans and the shallow Rio Grande. Only once had he been to a city, San Antonio. Dietz had taken him on one of his banking trips, and Newt had been in a daze from all there was to see. Once, too, he had gone with Dietz and P to deliver a small bunch of horses to Matagorda Bay, and had seen the great gray ocean. Then, too, he had felt dazed, staring at the world of water. But even the sight of the ocean had not stirred him so much as the thought of the north. All his life he had heard talk of the plains that had no end, and of the Indians and buffalo and all the creatures that lived on them. Mr. Gus had even talked of great bears so thick that bullets couldn't kill them, and deer-like creatures called elk twice the size of ordinary deer. Now, in only a few days, he would be going north, a prospect so exciting that for hours at a stretch he was taken away from himself into imaginings. He continued to do his normal work, although his mind wasn't really on it. He could imagine himself and Mouse out in a sea of grass chasing buffalo. He could scare himself to the point where his breath came short just imagining the great thick bears. Before the Irishman had been there a week, he had made friends with Sean O'Brien. At first the conversation was one-sided, for Sean was full of worries and prone to talking a blue streak once he found that Newt would listen and not make fun of him. The talk gushed out, most of it homesick talk. He missed his dead mother and said over and over again that he would not have left Ireland if she hadn't died. He would cry immediately at the thought of his mother, and when Newt revealed that his mother was also dead, the friendship became closer. "Did you have a pa?" Newt asked one day as they were resting by the river after a stretch of branding. "Yeah, I had one, the bastard," Sean said grimly. "He only came home when he was a mind to beat us." "Why would he beat you?" Newt asked. "He liked to," Sean said. "He was a bastard, Pa. He beat Ma and all of us whenever he could catch us. We laid for him once and was gonna brain him with a shovel, but he was a lucky one. The night was dark and we never seen him." "Well, what happened to him?" Newt asked. "Ha! The drunkard," Sean said. "He fell down a well and drowned. Saved us killing him and going to jail, I guess." Newt had always missed having a father, but the fact that Sean spoke so coldly of his put the matter in a different light. Perhaps he was not so unlucky after all. He was riding around the herd when Jake Spoon trotted past on his way to Lonesome Dove. "Going to town, Jake?" Newt asked. "Yes, I think I will," Jake said. He didn't stop to pass the time. In a second, he was out of sight in the shadows. It made Newt's spirits fall a little, for Jake had seldom said 2 words to him since he came back. Newt had to admit that Jake was not much interested in him, or the rest of them either. He gave the impression of not exactly liking anything around the Hat Creek outfit. Listening to the talk around the campfire at night, Newt learned that cowboys were unanimously hostile to Jake for fixing it so Lorena was no longer a whore. Dish, he knew, was particularly riled, though Dish never said much when the other boys were talking about it. "Hell," Needle said. "There never was but one thing worth doing on this border. Now a man can't even do that." "A man can do it plenty over in Mexico," Bert observed. "Cheaper, too." "That's what I like about you, Bert," Augustus said, as he whittled a mesquite twig into a toothpick. "You're a practical man." "No, he just likes them brown whores," Needle said. Needle kept a solemn look on his face at all times, seldom varying his expression. "Guess I've heard it said that you had a fancy for that woman yourself," Jasper Fant said. "I wouldn't have suspected it in a man as old as you." "What would you know about anything, Jasper?" Augustus asked. Age don't slow a man's whoring. It's a lack of income that does that. No more prosperous than you look, I wouldn't think you'd know much about it. We oughtn't to talk this way around these young boys, Bert said. I doubt one of them's even had a poke unless it was a milk cow. A general laugh went up. These young'uns will have to wait until we get to Ogallala, Augustus said. I've heard it's the Sodom of the plains. If it's worse than Fort Worth, I can't wait to get there, Jasper said. I've heard there's whores you can marry for a week if you stay in town that long. It won't matter how long we stay, Augustus said. I'll have skinned all you boys of several years' wages before we get that far. I'd skin you out of a month or two tonight if somebody'd break out the cards. That was all it took to get a game started. Apart from telling stories and speculating about whores, it seemed to Newt the cowboys would rather play cards than anything. Every night, if there was many as 4 who weren't working, they'd spread a saddle blanket near the campfire and play for hours, mostly using their future wages as money. Already the debts which existed were so complicated that it gave Newt a headache to think about them. Jasper Fant had lost his saddle to Dish Bogat, only Dish was letting him keep it and use it. A man dumb enough to bet his saddle is dumb enough to eat gourds, Mr. Gus had said when he heard about that bet. I have et okra, Jasper replied, but I have never yet et no gourd. So far, neither Newt nor the Rainey or Spettle boys had been allowed to play. The men felt it would be little short of criminal to bankrupt young men at the outset of their careers. But sometimes when nobody was using the deck, Newt borrowed it and he and the others played among themselves. Sean O'Brien joined in. They usually played for pebbles since none of them had any money. Talking to Sean had made Newt curious about Ireland. Sean said the grass was thick as a carpet there. The description didn't help much, for Newt had never seen a carpet. The Hat Creek outfit possessed no rugs of any kind, or anything that was green. Newt had a hard time imagining how a whole country would be covered with green grass. What do you do in Ireland, he asked. Mostly dig spuds, Sean said. But aren't there horses and cows? Newt asked. Sean thought for a moment, but could only remember about a dozen cows in the vicinity of his village, which was near the sea. He had slept beside their own milk cow on many a cold night, but he figured if he tried to lie down beside one of the animals they called cows in America, the cow would be 50 miles away before he got to sleep. There are cows, he said, but you don't find them in bunches. There'd be no place to put them. What do you do with all the grass, then? Newt asked. Why, nothing, Sean said. It just grows. The next morning, while helping Dietz and Pete build the branding fires, Newt mentioned that Sean said he brought his milk cow into the house and slept with her. Dietz had a good laugh at the thought of a cow in a house. P stopped work for about 10 minutes while he thought the matter over. P never liked to give his opinion too quickly. Well, it wouldn't work around the captain, he said finally, that being his opinion. How long do you think it'll take us to get up north? Newt asked Dietz, the acknowledged expert on times and distances. Though he had laughed about the cow in the house, Dietz had not been his usual cheerful self the last few days.
All right, take a look.
He felt a change coming. They were leaving Lonesome Dove, where the life had been quiet and steady, and Dietz could not understand the reason for it. The captain was not prone to rash moves, and yet it seemed rash to Dietz to just pick up and go north. Usually when he thought about the captain's decisions, he agreed with him, but this time he couldn't. He was going, but he felt uneasy in his mind. He remembered one thing the captain had drilled into them many times during the rangering years, that a good start made for a good campaign. Now it seemed to him that the captain had forgotten his own rule. Jake Spoon came home one day, and the next day the captain was ready to go, with a crew that was just a patched-together bunch, a lot of wild cattle, and horses, most of which were only half broke. Besides that, it was nearly April, late to be starting out to go so far. He had been on the plains in summer and seen how quickly the water holes dried up. Dietz felt a foreboding, a sense that they were starting out on a hard journey to a far place. And now there was the boy, too excited about the prospect to keep his mind on the work. "Chop them sticks," Dietz said. "Don't be worrying about the time. It'll be fall. I expect before we get there." Dietz watched the boy, hoping he wouldn't chop his foot off cutting the wood. He knew how to handle an axe, but he was forgetful once he got his mind on something. He didn't stop working, he just worked absently, thinking about something else. They were friends, though, he and Newt. The boy was young and had all his hopes, while Dietz was older and had fewer. Newt sometimes asked so many questions that Dietz had to laugh. He was like a cistern, from which questions flowed instead of water. Some Dietz answered, and some he didn't. He didn't tell him that even when life seemed easy, it kept on getting harder.
Watch it.
Dietz liked his work, liked being part of the outfit and having his name on the sign, yet he often felt sad. His main happiness consisted of sitting with his back against the water tank at night, watching the sky and the changing moon. He had known several men who blew their heads off, and he had pondered it much. It seemed to him it was probably because they could not take enough happiness just from the sky and the moon to carry them over the low feelings that came to all men. Those feelings hadn't come to the boy yet. He was a good boy, as gentle as the gray doves that came to peck the gravel on the flats behind the barn. He would try to do any task that was asked of him. And if he worried over much, it was that he wasn't good enough at his work to please the captain. But then the whole outfit worried about that. All at least except for Mr. Gus. Dietz himself had fallen short a few times over the years and had felt the captain's displeasure afflict him like a bruise. "I swan," P said. "Jake slipped off again. He sure don't take to Brandon." "Mr. Jake, he don't take to work," Dietz said with a chuckle. "It don't have to be Brandon." Newt went on chopping wood, a little bothered by the fact that Jake had such a bad reputation with the men. They all considered him to be a man who shirked his duties. Mr. Gus worked even less, and nobody seemed to feel that way about him. It was puzzling, and to Newt's mind, unfair. Jake had just returned. Once he got rested, perhaps he would be more interested in work. While he was puzzling about it, he took a bad swing with the axe, and a piece of mesquite he was trying to split flew right up and almost hit Dietz in the head. It would have, except that Dietz had evidently been expecting just such an accident. He quickly ducked. Newt was embarrassed. At the moment he had made his slip, his mind had drifted to Lorena. He was wondering what spending a day with her would actually be like. Would they just sit in the saloon playing cards, or what? Since he had not spoken to her, it was hard for him to know what the two of them could do for a whole day, but he liked to think about it. Dietz didn't say a word or even look at Newt accusingly, but Newt was still mortified. There were times when Dietz seemed almost to be able to read his mind. What would he think if he knew that he had been thinking about Lorena? After that, he reminded himself that Lorena was Jake's woman and tried to pay better attention to splitting the tough wood.